Gene Park adjusted the platinum cufflinks on his tailored Ermenegildo Zegna suit as his armored black Genesis G90 glided through the neon-lit streets of Gangnam. Two Range Rovers followed close behind, his security detail, always watching, always ready. The evening lights of Seoul reflected off the tinted windows, illuminating the woman beside him. Min Ji-yoon, 28, sleek black hair styled in an elegant chignon, diamond earrings worth more than most people's cars catching the light with every turn of her head. She was everything his world demanded, beautiful, connected, powerful. At 35, Gene had learned that power could buy almost anything, including alliances sealed by marriage. His engagement to Minji was 4 months old, long enough to satisfy both families, short enough to avoid pretending he felt anything beyond obligation. No love, no passion, no complications, just business dressed as a wedding. Father says the Busan partnership will double our territory, Minji said, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. Our wedding will be the event of the year. Every Chaebol family will be there. Gene said nothing. His dark eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, his jaw set in that familiar expression of cold calculation. The traffic light turned red. The crosswalk filled with evening pedestrians, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that the man watching them from behind bulletproof glass had ended lives with a single word. Gene watched them absently, his mind already calculating tomorrow's negotiations, when something made him freeze. A woman was crossing the street. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand pressed against her side as if in pain. 2 babies were bundled against her chest in a makeshift beige sling. Twins, wrapped in worn blankets that had seen better days. Her hair fell in disheveled waves around her face, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked exhausted. She looked like she hadn't slept in months. But worse than the exhaustion was the bruise, a purple bloom across her left cheekbone, the kind that takes days to appear and weeks to fade. Even from a distance, even with her head down, even after 14 months of forcing himself to forget, Gene knew that walk, the way she held her shoulders, the quiet strength in every step even when she was clearly hurt. Hannah Kim, his former lover. The woman he had abandoned exactly 1 year and 2 months ago. The babies looked about 4 months old. The timing would be exactly right. Jin's hands that had never trembled holding a gun, now shook against the leather armrest. The world outside seemed to slow as Hannah paused in the middle of the crosswalk. One of the babies began to fuss. She shifted them both with a wince, pressing a gentle kiss to the crying infant's forehead, humming something soft, something Gene recognized from a lifetime ago. The baby quieted. She continued walking, limping slightly on her right leg, disappearing into the crowd on the other side of the street. Gene. Minji's voice cut through the fog. The light's green. Your driver is waiting. He blinked. Cars behind them were waiting. His driver, Dae-young, was glancing back through the rearview mirror, confused by his boss's hesitation. Gene, you look like you've seen a ghost, Minji said, studying his face with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. Do you know that woman? Gene forced his expression back to stone. No one important. But his mind was racing. Had Hannah been pregnant when he left her that night? The night he had told her they were finished, that she didn't belong in his world, that loving him would only get her killed? Had she been carrying his children? Had she known and chosen not to tell him? Or had she discovered it afterward, alone and abandoned, and made the decision to raise them without him? The questions multiplied, each one more devastating than the last. He had left her to protect her. He had convinced himself that walking away was the noble choice, that a woman like Hannah deserved sunlight, not shadows, that she deserved a normal life, not a life spent looking over her shoulder, waiting for his enemies to use her against him. But now, seeing her with those babies exhausted, injured, struggling, but still standing, Gene realized something that made his carefully constructed world crack down the middle. She had given him children. She had given him a son and a daughter, and she had done it completely, utterly alone. While he sat in a bulletproof car beside a woman he didn't love, planning a wedding that meant nothing, Hannah had been fighting to survive. Fighting to keep their children alive. Fighting a battle he should have been there to fight beside her. And someone had hurt her. Someone had put their hands on the mother of his children. The rage that flooded through Gene was cold and surgical, the kind of rage that had built his empire. One question echoed in his mind, louder than the blood pounding in his ears. What if the life he had been so determined to protect her from was the only life worth living? The most luxurious hotel in Gangnam that night seemed to fade to a blur in Jin's eyes. Crystal chandeliers trembled overhead. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand ballroom, and Minji was saying something about the seating arrangements for the wedding reception. Jin heard her voice, but he couldn't focus on the words. His gaze kept sliding back to the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the street, where pedestrians moved through the cool evening air. He wondered where Hannah was right now. Was she safe? Were the children warm enough? Who had hurt her? And how long did they have left to live? Jean, are you listening to me? Minji set her champagne flute down, her tone edged with irritation. I'm asking about the guest list. My father wants to invite at least 600 people. Jean turned back to her and nodded mechanically. Fine. You decide. Minji frowned, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together. Are you okay? You've been strange since we were in the car. I'm just thinking about business, Jean said, his voice flat. It was a lie. He wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about Hannah's tired eyes, about the way she kissed the forehead of a crying baby with a tenderness he'd never seen in anyone else, about the bruise on her face that someone would pay for with their life. He was thinking about how she had lived for 14 months alone with 2 newborn babies while he sat here drinking expensive champagne beside a woman he didn't love. The gala dragged on like it would never end. Jean answered Minji with short sentences, agreed with everything she suggested without truly listening. He shook hands with politicians and business partners, smiled at the right moments, played his role perfectly. But inside, he was already gone. When they finally left the venue, he let out a quiet breath of relief. The motorcade took Minji home, first to her family's estate in Pyeongchang-dong. Then Jean ordered Dae-young to return to his own penthouse. The park residence sat 43 floors above Hanam-dong, overlooking all of Seoul. Floor-to-ceiling glass reflected the glittering city lights below like a carpet of stars. Jean stood at the window of his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, but he didn't drink. He only stood there, staring down at the city, wondering where in that sea of light Hannah might be. Whether she was safe. Whether she had enough money for food. Whether those babies were sleeping peacefully or crying from hunger. The clock struck 2 in the morning. Jean picked up his phone and called Junho. Junho sounded half asleep at first, but he snapped awake the instant he heard his boss's voice. Boss, what is it? Find everything about Hannah Kim, Jean said, his voice cold and final. Her current address, her job, her financial situation. Medical records. And those children, I want to know everything. Who hurt her? When? And why I didn't know about it. Silence stretched on the other end of the line. Too long. Jin's jaw tightened. Junho. Boss? Junho hesitated. A rare thing for a 42-year-old man who had followed Jean for 15 years. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Jin's heart clenched. Say it. Not over the phone. Junho exhaled, and Jean could hear the weight in his voice. Tomorrow morning. When you read the file, you'll understand. And boss? A pause. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Jean stood alone in his penthouse, 43 floors above the city, surrounded by everything money and power could buy. And for the first time in his life, he realized he had nothing at all. Chapter 1. The file arrived at exactly midnight, delivered by Junho himself. Jean sat behind his desk in the study, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he no longer cared about. Junho placed the manila folder on the polished surface with hands that weren't quite steady. Jin didn't open it immediately. He just stared at it, this thin collection of paper that contained 14 months of Hannah's life. 14 months he had missed. 14 months he had convinced himself were necessary. "Tell me," Jin said, his voice quiet in a way that made experienced men nervous. Junho cleared his throat. "She lives in Mapogu. 4th floor walk-up. No elevator. The building is not in good condition." He hesitated. The twins were born premature at Seoul National University Hospital. Emergency C-section at 32 weeks. She was alone. Jin's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk, but his face remained perfectly still. Hospital bills total 45 million won. She's been making minimum payments, but the interest keeps adding more. She works night shifts as a medical records clerk at the same hospital. Minimum wage. She takes the twins to a community daycare that operates on donations. Junho paused. "The babies are named Park Kai and Park Ian. She gave them your surname." Something cracked inside Jin's chest. She had given them his name. Even after he had abandoned her, even after he had told her she meant nothing, she had given their sons his name. "The injury?" Jin asked. 3 days ago. 2 men cornered her outside the daycare. They beat her and took what little money she had. We believe it was Choi Sung-min's people. A message. Jin stood slowly, walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him, a stranger in an expensive suit who had let the woman he loved raise his children in poverty while dodging his enemies. "The phone records," he said softly. This was the part Junho had been dreading. "She called 17 times in the first month after you ended things. She left voicemails, text messages, emails." A long pause. "I intercepted all of them." Jin turned. "You what?" "I was protecting the family interests," Junho said quickly. "The engagement to the Yoon family was too important. If you had known about the pregnancy, you would have." "I would have what?" Jin's voice was dangerously quiet. "Chosen my children? Chosen the woman I loved over a business arrangement." Yes. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Junho had made the choice for him. Had decided that Jin's empire mattered more than Jin's family. Had condemned Hannah to 14 months of hell because a marriage alliance was more valuable than 2 innocent lives. Jin walked back to his desk, opened a drawer, and removed Junho's weapon, the Glock 19 that every member of his inner circle carried. He set it on the desk between them. "You're demoted," Jin said. "You'll work under Taesung now. You'll follow orders without question. And you'll help me fix this." Junho's eyes widened. "Boss, you kept my children from me. You let their mother suffer because you thought you knew better than I did what my life should be." Jin leaned forward, his voice like ice. "The only reason you're still breathing is because I need every man I have for what comes next. But if you ever make a decision about my family again without my knowledge, Junho, they won't find your body." Junho picked up his weapon with shaking hands and bowed deeply. "Yes, boss. Get out." When the door closed, Jin finally opened the file. And there she was, Hannah, photographed outside the hospital in her clerk's uniform, looking exhausted and beautiful and so far removed from the life she deserved that Jin felt something close to despair. He had 14 months to make up for. And someone to kill. Chapter 2. The employee parking lot of Seoul National University Hospital was nearly empty at 2 a.m. Jin waited in the shadows near Hannah's car, a 15-year-old Hyundai, with a dented bumper and a window held together with tape. He had dismissed Daejong and come alone. This conversation didn't need witnesses. She appeared at 2:07, exhaustion written into every line of her body. She was halfway to her car before she saw him, and when she did, she froze. "Hannah," Jin said quietly. The shock on her face lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it transformed into something else entirely, something raw and furious and 14 months in the making. "No." Her voice shook. "You don't get to do this." You don't get to show up now. I need to talk to you. You needed to talk to me when I called you 17 times. The words exploded out of her. You needed to talk to me when I was in the emergency room, bleeding, terrified, alone, having our babies cut out of me at 32 weeks because my body couldn't handle the stress anymore. Jean felt each word like a physical blow. You lost the right to be their father the night you told me I was nothing to you, Hannah continued, tears streaming down her face now. You lost the right when you threw me out of your life like I was disposable. When you let me spend 2 months sleeping in a hospital chair because Kai and Ian were too small to breathe on their own. When you made me choose between paying rent and buying formula. I was trying to protect you, Jean said, his voice rough. Protect me? Hannah laughed bitterly. From what, Jean? From you? Because that worked out perfectly, didn't it? She gestured to the bruise on her face. Your enemies found me anyway. Jean took a step closer. Choi Sung-min came to me a year ago. He said if I didn't end things with you, he would kill you. Slowly. Painfully. He would make me watch. So I pushed you away to keep you safe. Hannah stared at him. You left me to protect me from danger, and instead you left me defenseless against it. Choi's men found me 3 days ago. They beat me outside the daycare while my sons were inside. They took the money I needed for this week's food. Her voice cracked. Your protection almost killed me, Jean. It almost killed our babies. Jean pulled out his phone and showed her the surveillance photos Junho had compiled. Hannah outside her apartment. Hannah at the daycare. Hannah at work. Different men in the background of each photo, always watching. Choi hasn't stopped, Jean said. He's been tracking you for months. The attack 3 days ago wasn't random, it was a message to me. He knows about Kai and Ian now. And he's going to use them to destroy me. Hannah's face went pale. No, you need to leave. You need to stay away from us. That won't stop him. You think walking away will protect them? I tried that. It failed. Jin's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his desperation. Let me move you somewhere safe. Let me protect you properly this time. Not by leaving, but by staying. I don't trust you, Hannah whispered. I know. You shouldn't. Jean looked at her with an honesty that hurt. I made the worst choice of my life when I left you. I was a coward who thought distance would keep you safe. But our sons are in danger now because of me. And I'm begging you, not as the man who hurt you, but as their father, let me keep them alive. The parking lot was silent except for the distant wail of an ambulance. Hannah closed her eyes, one hand pressed against her bruised ribs. When she opened them, her voice was hollow. This is temporary. Just until the threat is gone. And Jean, she looked at him with something worse than hatred, disappointment. You're doing this for them. Not for me. We're clear on that. Crystal clear, Jean said, even though it was another lie. Because he was doing this for all 3 of them. Chapter 3. The penthouse felt like a museum the first time Hannah stepped into it. All glass and marble and sharp edges, beautiful and cold and utterly lifeless. 43 floors above Seoul, insulated from the noise and chaos of real life. She held Ian against her chest while Jean carried Kai, and she wondered how anyone could live in a place with no warmth. The guest suite is through here, Jean said, leading her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Private bathroom. The twins can sleep in the adjoining room. I've ordered cribs and everything else you'll need. Hannah said nothing. She was too exhausted to fight, too scared to argue. The surveillance photos were burned into her mind. She set Ian down gently in the temporary bassinet Jin's people had brought, watching her son's tiny chest rise and fall. Thank you, she finally said, the words tasting strange in her mouth. Jean nodded and left her alone. The first 3 days passed in a strange, silent routine. Hannah cared for the twins in her suite. Jean left early for work and returned late. They moved around each other like ghosts, occupying the same space, but barely speaking. She caught him sometimes, standing outside the twins' room in the early morning hours, just watching them sleep through the doorway. He never came in. never asked to hold them. It was as if he was afraid to get too close. On the fourth day, everything shattered. Hannah was in the living room, attempting to soothe a fussy Kai when the private elevator chimed. She turned, expecting Jin's security team. Instead, Min Ji-yoon stepped out in Chanel and fury. "Where is Jin?" Min Ji demanded, then stopped dead when she saw Hannah. Her eyes dropped to the baby in Hannah's arms, and understanding dawned with devastating clarity. "Who are you?" Jin emerged from his study, and the expression on his face told Hannah he hadn't expected this. "Minji, you need to leave." "Is that a baby?" Minji's voice climbed higher. "Jin, what is happening?" Jin crossed the room and took Kai from Hannah's arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man like him. The baby quieted instantly, tiny fingers curling around Jin's thumb. Minji watched this with her mouth open, the pieces assembling into a picture she didn't want to see. "The engagement is over," Jin said quietly, looking directly at Minji while holding his son. "I'm sorry." For a moment, Minji just stared. Then her perfectly composed facade cracked like porcelain dropped from a great height. "Sorry." Her voice was venomous. "You're sorry? We've been engaged for 4 months. The invitations are printed. The venue is booked. My father has already negotiated contracts based on our alliance, and you're sorry." "I have children," Jin said simply. "I have responsibilities I can't ignore." "You had responsibilities to me." Minji yanked the engagement ring from her finger, 5 carats, flawless, worth 300 million won, and hurled it across the marble floor. It skittered and bounced, finally coming to rest near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "My father will destroy you for this. Every political connection, every business deal, every alliance you've built, he'll tear it all down." "I understand," Jin said. "No, you don't." Minji's smile was terrible. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Jin Park. And I'll help him do it." She turned on her Louboutin heel and walked back to the elevator. Just before the doors closed, Hannah saw her pull out her phone. Jin stood in the center of his penthouse, holding his son, and watched his empire begin to crumble. Kai yawned and nestled closer to his father's chest, completely unaware that he'd just cost Jin Park everything. Across the city, in a private club in Gangnam, Minji's call connected. "Choi Sung-min." Her voice was ice and diamonds. "I believe we have a common enemy now. Let's discuss terms." Chapter 4. Jin Park could negotiate million-dollar deals, orchestrate complex territorial agreements, and command the loyalty of dangerous men. But a 4-month-old baby defeated him completely. "It's too hot," Hannah said from the doorway, watching Jin test the formula against his wrist for the 3rd time. "You'll burn his mouth. The instructions say body temperature. The instructions assume you can judge body temperature." She crossed the kitchen and took the bottle from him, adding cold water with the efficiency of 14 months' practice. "Like this." Ian wailed from his bouncer, and Jin picked him up with the careful uncertainty of someone handling a live grenade. The baby's cries only intensified. "Support his head more," Hannah instructed, then sighed and demonstrated with Kai. "Like this." "See?" Jin adjusted his grip, and Ian quieted slightly, though his face remained red and furious. "I'm trying," Jin said quietly. "I know," Hannah replied, and something in her voice had softened. The diaper incident happened 2 days later. Jin had insisted on learning, and Hannah had let him try. He'd gotten the tabs wrong, somehow created gaps on both sides, and ended up with Ian screaming and the changing table a disaster zone. "How do you make this look easy?" Jin asked, frustrated. Hannah almost smiled. "Practice. 14 months of it." The words were pointed, but her tone lacked the earlier venom. She showed him again, slower this time, and Jin watched with the intense focus he usually reserved for reading contracts. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Kai wouldn't stop crying. Hannah had tried everything: feeding, changing, rocking, checking for fever. Nothing worked. Jin appeared in the doorway of the twins' room, dressed in a t-shirt and pajama pants that made him look almost human. "Let me try," he said. Hannah was too exhausted to argue. She handed over the screaming baby and collapsed into the rocking chair, watching through half-closed eyes. Jean held Kai against his chest and began to walk, that same uncertain gentleness in his movements. The crying continued. Then, so quietly Hannah almost missed it, Jean started to sing. It was in Korean, an old lullaby about the moon and stars. His voice was rough, unpracticed, but there was something in it, something remembered from a childhood he'd never talked about. Kai's cries softened to whimpers, then to silence. Ian, in his crib, stopped fussing too. Hannah watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "My mother sang that," Jean said softly, not looking at her. "Before she died. It's the only thing I remember about her." Something shifted in the room, in the space between them. The next morning, Hannah checked her hospital account and froze. The $45 million debt was gone. Paid in full. She found Jean in his study. "You had no right," she said, but her anger was complicated now, tangled with relief and gratitude she didn't want to feel. "I had every right," Jean replied. "That debt exists because I wasn't there. You can't just fix everything with money." "I know, but I can start with what I can fix." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry it took me this long." Hannah left without another word, but Jean saw her pause at the door. 3 days later, both twins were on a play mat while Jean lay on the floor beside them, making exaggerated faces. Hannah was preparing bottles in the kitchen when she heard it, Jin's laughter, genuine and unguarded, as Kai rolled over for the first time. "Hannah, did you see that?" Jean was grinning like a child himself. He rolled over. "Ian, come on, you can do it too." Ian, not to be outdone, rolled onto his stomach moments later. Hannah stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Jean Park, Seoul's most feared crime boss, lying on the floor celebrating his son's milestone, and felt something dangerous happen in her chest. Her walls, so carefully maintained for 14 months, began to crack. Chapter 5. The nightmare came at 3 a.m. as they always did. Hannah woke gasping, her father's voice still echoing in her ears, worthless, just like your mother, overlapping with the sound of fists hitting flesh, Choi's men laughing as she curled around her pregnant belly. The sterile smell of the operating room when they told her the babies were coming too early, we're losing their heartbeats, we need to cut now. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sobs, but they came anyway, silent and devastating. She didn't want to wake the twins. Didn't want Jean to hear her falling apart. The knock was soft. "Hannah?" She should have told him to leave. Should have maintained the distance she'd worked so hard to rebuild. Instead, she whispered, "Come in." Jean entered in a t-shirt and pajama pants, his hair disheveled, looking nothing like the man who commanded an empire. He sat on the edge of the bed, keeping space between them. "Nightmare?" he asked quietly. Hannah nodded, wiping her face. "My father. The attack. The hospital. They all blend together now. Your father. He used to beat my mother. Then her. After she died, it was just me." Hannah's voice was hollow. "He told me I'd never be worth anything. That I'd end up alone and broken. And for a while, after you left, I thought he was right." Jin's jaw tightened. "Where's he now?" "Dead. 5 years ago." She looked at him. "You can't kill him for me, Jean. He's already gone." They sat in silence. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, 43 floors below. "I was pregnant when you left," Hannah said finally. 6 weeks. I didn't know yet. By the time I did, you wouldn't take my calls." She drew her knees up to her chest. "I was so angry you left that I almost didn't tell you even when Kai and Ian were born. That's how much it hurt. I wanted you to never know what you'd missed." "Why did you give them my name?" Jean asked. "Because they deserved a father, even if he wasn't there." Hannah's voice cracked. "Even if he'd abandoned us, they deserved to know where they came from." "Who they came from?" Jean was quiet for a long moment. Then, I've been alone my whole life. My father taught me that love was weakness, that caring about people made you vulnerable. He had 3 mistresses and never loved any of them, including my mother. When she died, he didn't even attend the funeral. Jin's hands were clenched in his lap. When I met you, I was terrified not of loving you, but of failing you the way he failed everyone. So I failed you first. I convinced myself that walking away was noble, that I was protecting you, but really I was just a coward too scared to try. Hannah reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she'd touched him willingly since the hospital parking lot. We're both broken, she whispered. Yeah, Jean agreed. But maybe broken people can still build something whole. They talked until dawn, about scars and fears and the weight of carrying children into a world that felt too dangerous. The twins woke at 6 a.m., and together Jean and Hannah went to feed them, moving around each other with a new understanding. Across the city, in a private dining room at a restaurant Jin's family had once owned, Min Ji-yoon and Choi Sung-min raised their glasses. To mutual benefit, Choi said, his smile sharp as a blade. To destroying Jean Park, Minji corrected, and they drank to the ruin of the man who dared to choose love over power. The trap was already in motion. Chapter 6. The call came at 6 a.m., and Jean knew immediately it was trouble. The Busan faction is threatening to break away, Junho said, his voice tense. Park Dae-shik is meeting with the Gwangju crew. If we don't intervene now, we'll have a full gang war by the weekend. Jean closed his eyes. Timing couldn't be worse. I need 24 hours. We don't have 24 hours. Dae-shik wants you there by tonight or he's making his move. In the twins' room, Hannah was changing Ian's diaper while Kai babbled in his crib. She looked up when Jean entered, and something in his expression made her freeze. I have to go to Busan, he said. Just overnight. There's a situation. No. The word was immediate, sharp with fear. I'm tripling security. 12 guards, 4 on each shift. Cameras on every entrance. You'll be safer here than anywhere else in Seoul. Jean crouched beside her. I wouldn't go if it wasn't critical. If I don't stop this, the entire organization fractures and we'll have gang wars spilling into the streets. That's more dangerous for you and the boys than one night with maximum security. Hannah searched his face, then nodded reluctantly. One night. Jean left at noon in a convoy of 3 vehicles. Hannah watched from the penthouse windows as the cars disappeared into Seoul's traffic, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. The security team was professional and thorough. She recognized most of them from the previous weeks, men who nodded respectfully and kept their distance. One guard, Tae-won, seemed nervous, checking his phone repeatedly, avoiding eye contact. Hannah noticed, but dismissed it. Everyone was on edge with Jean gone. She didn't know Tae-won had been Choi Sung-min's inside man for 6 months, carefully embedded, patiently waiting for exactly this opportunity. At 9 p.m., Hannah put the twins down for the night. She checked the monitors. All cameras showed empty hallways, the guards at their posts. Everything normal. At 9:47 p.m., Tae-won stepped into a supply closet and opened an app on his phone. 3 taps disabled the entire security system. The breach happened fast. 8 men came through the service entrance Tae-won had unlocked. They moved with military precision, silenced, weapons drawn. The other guards didn't even have time to call for help. Hannah heard the first crash and knew immediately. She ran to the twins' room, scooped up both babies, and slammed her thumb on the panic button Jean had installed by the crib. The alarm screamed through the penthouse for exactly 4 seconds before someone cut the power. She made it to the panic room entrance before they caught her. Hannah fought like a cornered animal, one arm wrapped around both twins, the other swinging, scratching, biting. She got one man in the eyes with her nails, kicked another hard enough to hear bone crack. But there were too many. A fist connected with her temple. The world tilted. When Jin's backup team arrived 12 minutes later, alerted by the panic alarm before it was cut, they found the penthouse destroyed. Furniture overturned, Glass everywhere, 4 of Jin's guards dead or unconscious. Blood smeared across the marble floors, some of it Hannah's, and spray-painted on the living room wall in red. Incheon Docks. Warehouse 7. Alone. Junho stood in the center of the carnage and called Jin. "Boss," he said, his voice breaking. "They took them. They took all 3. Chapter 7. Jin was in the middle of negotiations with Park Dae-shik when his phone vibrated. He ignored it. The second vibration came 30 seconds later. Then a third. He glanced down and saw Junho's message, "Answer now." Jin excused himself and stepped into the hallway. The video call connected before he could speak. Hannah's face filled the screen, and Jin's world stopped. She was tied to a chair, blood dried on her temple, her left eye swollen shut. Behind her, in a plastic playpen meant for toddlers at a park, Kai and Ian screamed. Their cries were the sound of pure terror, the kind that comes from hours of being ignored by strangers in a cold warehouse. Then Choi Sung-min's face replaced Hannah's, his smile wide and victorious. "Jin Park," Choi said pleasantly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Jin's voice was barely human. "If you hurt them." "You'll what?" "You're 3 hours away. And I'm here with your woman and your bastards." Choi's smile widened. "You took something from me, Jin Park. Territory, respect, money. You've spent a decade making my life difficult. Now I take everything from you. What do you want?" "Come to Incheon Docks, Warehouse 7. Alone. Unarmed. Before dawn." Choi leaned closer to the camera. "If I see backup, if I smell a tactical team, if you do anything except walk through that door by yourself at sunrise, I'll kill one of the twins first. Let you choose which one. Then the other. Then I'll let my men have some fun with Hannah before I kill her too." The screen went black. Jin was in his car 30 seconds later. His motorcade hit the Gyeongbu Expressway doing 200 kilometers per hour, the speedometer climbing higher as rage and terror fought for control of his mind. Junho called every 10 minutes with updates. They'd tracked the location, confirmed Choi had at least 12 men. Satellite imagery showed vehicles positioned for a quick escape. "We can breach from 3 sides," Junho said. "Minimal risk." "No." Jin's voice was final. "The babies are in a playpen. Hannah's tied up. 1 stray bullet and they're dead. I go in alone." "Boss, it's a trap." "I know it's a trap." Jin's control finally cracked. "But they're my family, Junho. My sons. The woman I love. If there's even a 1% chance that going in alone keeps them alive, then that's what I do." Silence on the line. "Then, we'll be close. Not visible, but close." "Good." Dawn was breaking over Incheon Harbor when Jin arrived. The warehouse district was industrial and desolate, perfect for violence no one would witness. Warehouse 7 loomed ahead, rusted and listing slightly, its windows dark. Jin parked and stepped out, raising his arms to show he was unarmed. The warehouse door scraped open. Inside, the space was vast and cold. Choi's men lined the walls, weapons drawn. In the center, Hannah remained tied to the chair, conscious now but barely. The twins cried weakly in their playpen, exhausted from hours of terror. And standing beside them, dressed in designer clothes completely inappropriate for a warehouse at dawn, was Min Ji-yoon. She smiled when she saw Jin's expression. "I wanted to watch," she said simply. Choi Sung-min stepped forward, holding a pistol casually. "Jin Park. You actually came." "Let them go," Jin said. "Eventually. First, we have business." Choi gestured to a table where papers were spread out. "Transfer documents. Every territory, every asset, every connection you have. You sign these, and maybe, I let your little family walk out of here." "Kneel first," Minji added, her voice sweet as poison. "Beg." Jin met Hannah's eyes across the warehouse. She was shaking her head slightly, tears streaming down her face, trying to tell him not to do it. Jin knelt on the concrete floor. "Please," he said. "Take everything. Just let them live." Choi laughed. Now that's what I wanted to hear. Chapter 8. Jean knelt on the concrete, his hands steady as Choi placed the contract in front of him. Every territory his father had built, every connection, every asset, all of it reduced to signatures on paper. He picked up the pen. Smart choice, Choi said, his gun still trained on Hannah. Jean signed the first page. The second. As he reached for the third, he whispered a single word, Songbird. The breaches happened simultaneously. Every entrance exploded inward, doors, windows, the rusted skylights above. Smoke grenades hit the concrete, filling the warehouse with blinding white fog. Choi's men spun, confused, shouting, firing blindly into the chaos. Jean was already moving. He pulled the tactical knife from his shoe, the one item Choi's men had missed in their pat-down because Jean had trained for years to hide it perfectly, and sprinted through the smoke to Hannah. The zip ties cut easily. She was on her feet before he finished. The twins, she screamed. Gunfire erupted around them. Jin's team was overwhelming Choi's men, but bullets don't discriminate. Jean grabbed Ian from the playpen while Hannah scooped up Kai, both babies shrieking in terror. They ran toward the eastern exit where Junho's voice called through the smoke. Choi Sung-min, enraged and desperate, emerged from the haze. His face was twisted with fury, his carefully laid trap destroyed in seconds. He raised his pistol, not at Jean he could kill any time. He aimed at Hannah's back. Time slowed in that terrible way it does when the world is about to break. Jean saw Choi's finger tighten on the trigger. Saw Hannah running, unaware, holding their son. Saw the future collapse into a single, impossible choice. Jean shoved Hannah forward with his free hand, hard enough to send her stumbling toward safety, and stepped into the bullet's path. The impact was a sledgehammer to his chest, spinning him around. Ian flew from his arms. Jean saw Junho catch the baby in one fluid motion, saw Hannah turn, saw her face as she realized what had happened. Jean hit the concrete and the world became noise and confusion. More gunfire. Screaming. Through the fog he saw Choi go down, 3 of Jin's men concentrating fire until the rival boss wasn't moving anymore. Minji tried to run and was tackled at the warehouse door, her designer dress tearing as they zip-tied her wrists. Then Hannah was there, kneeling beside him, both twins safe in Junho's arms behind her. Jean, no, her hands pressed against his chest where blood bloomed like a flower. Stay with me. Jean, please. The boys. Jin's voice was weak, bubbling. They're safe. They're both safe. Tears fell on his face. You stupid man. Why did you? Had to. Jean tried to smile and tasted copper. Couldn't lose you. Not again. The warehouse was quieting now. Jin's men had secured the perimeter. Someone was calling for emergency medical, their voice urgent and distant. Jin's vision was tunneling, darkness creeping in from the edges. I'm sorry, he whispered, finding Hannah's eyes. Sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to stay. You don't get to leave now, Hannah sobbed. You don't get to be brave for 5 minutes and then die. Our sons need their father. Her voice broke. I need you to stay. Jean wanted to answer, wanted to tell her he loved her, that he'd loved her from the moment she'd smiled at him in a coffee shop 2 years ago, that leaving her had been the worst mistake of his life. But the darkness was winning. The last thing he heard was Hannah screaming for the medics to hurry, and the sound of his sons crying for a father they'd barely known. Then nothing. Chapter 9. Seoul National University Hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Hannah sat in the surgical waiting room with both twins against her chest, their combined weight the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. 6 hours. Jean had been in surgery for 6 hours. Junho appeared periodically with updates that felt simultaneously critical and meaningless. Choi's organization was dismantling itself without leadership. Minji's family had issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. The Yoon patriarch was already negotiating with prosecutors, throwing his daughter to the wolves to save the family name. There's something else, Junho said quietly, sitting beside her. Jean left instructions. Sealed documents with his lawyer, updated the night before he left for Busan. If he died, Junho's voice roughened. Everything goes to you and the boys. Every asset, every property, every connection. He made you his heir. Hannah closed her eyes. I don't want his empire. I want him alive. I know. 7 hours. 8. At hour 9, a surgeon emerged, exhausted but not defeated. He's stable, she said, and Hannah could breathe again. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters. We repaired the damage, but the next 72 hours are critical. Jean woke on the 3rd day. Hannah had refused to leave his room, sleeping in the chair beside his bed with the twins in a hospital crib the nurses had brought. She woke to the sound of movement, Jin's hand twitching, his eyes fluttering open. Jean, she whispered, standing so fast she nearly knocked over the 4-stand. His eyes found hers, unfocused but alive. Boys. Right here. They're right here. Hannah wheeled the crib closer. Kai was awake, looking at the strange room with wide eyes. When he saw Jean, saw those familiar features, he reached through the crib bars with tiny fingers and said his first word. Appa. Jean Park, who had never cried when his father died, who had never cried when his mother was buried, who had trained himself for 35 years to show no weakness, felt tears slip down his face. That's right, he whispered. Appa's here. 1 year later. The house in Songnam was small by Jin's previous standards, 3 bedrooms, a modest garden, neighbors who knew him as Mr. Park who works in consulting. No armed guards. No bulletproof windows. Just a swing set and a sandbox and the sound of toddlers laughing. Jean Park was no longer a mafia boss. He'd brokered deals with prosecutors, testified against corrupt officials who'd been on his payroll, and walked away from the empire his father had built. Some called him a traitor. Others called him wise. He called himself a father, and that was enough. Kai and Ian chased each other across the grass, their words now forming sentences, their personalities emerging, Kai cautious and thoughtful, Ian bold and mischievous. Hannah watched from the porch, one hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. Jean joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, feeling their daughter kick against his palm. Are you ready? He asked. Hannah turned, pulling out a small velvet box she'd been hiding. Inside were 2 simple gold bands, no diamonds, no ostentation, just commitment. I've been ready, she said softly. I was just waiting for you to believe you deserved it. They married the following weekend. 12 guests, Junho, who had earned his way back into Jin's trust, a few of Hannah's co-workers from the hospital, the elderly couple next door who babysat sometimes. No politicians. No business associates. No empire. When their daughter was born 3 months later, small and perfect and screaming with life, they named her Jiwoo. Wisdom and courage, Jean whispered, holding her against his chest while Kai and Ian peered into the hospital bassinet with fascination. The 2 things that saved our family. Hannah, exhausted and radiant, watched her husband with their 3 children and thought about the man in the Genesis G90 who'd seen her at a crosswalk 14 months ago. That man had been powerful but empty, rich but poor in every way that mattered. This man, holding their daughter while teaching their sons to be gentle, trading an empire for a garden, choosing love over fear, this man was the one she'd always known he could be. Thank you, she said. Jean looked at her, confused. For what? For being brave enough to stay. Outside, Seoul glittered in the distance, 43 floors and a lifetime away. Inside, the Park family was finally completely home. The end.